الاستراتيجية هي مجموعة من الخطط الجزئية. هذه الخطط الجزئية هي التكتيك، بالإضافة أيضا إلى أن الاستراتيجية من الناحية الزمنية أبعد. يعني مثلا لما نقولوا هدف بعد سنوات، 5 سنوات، 10 سنوات، 20 سنة، هذا الأهداف تسمى أهداف استراتيجية. أما التكتيك فيكون عبارة عن هدف
للتعامل مع جزئية عامة.
نعم.
ربما
وتحت
في
التكتيك كاين وتحت التكتيك كاين الأهداف التشغيلية اوبيراسيونيل، يعني مثلا حاجة تنفيذية. أما
With Radio Algeria International, you will not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Algeria and Slovenia have called for a UN Security Council meeting to discuss the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The European Council, or the European Court of Justice, has affirmed that Morocco has no sovereignty over Western Sahara and that the occupied territory cannot be included in any EU-Morocco trade or fisheries agreement. And at least 23 Palestinians have been killed over the past 24 hours and more than 60 others wounded in new airstrikes carried out by the Israeli army against various spots of the Gaza Strip. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. First in our news, Algeria and Slovenia have called for a meeting of the United Nations Security Council to discuss the humanitarian situation in Gaza, ravaged by almost a year of Israeli genocidal war, at a time when the Algerian mission to the UN in New York is constantly stressing the urgent need for an immediate ceasefire to avoid an escalation of tensions in the Middle East region. The call for the meeting comes in the light of the dangerous situation in Gaza, including the latest developments on the ground. Algeria has made several calls to this effect since becoming a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council in January, as part of its efforts to support the Palestinian people and their just cause and to secure an immediate ceasefire in the besieged enclave. Speaking at the Security Council meeting in New York last Wednesday on the situation in the Middle East, Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ammar Benjama, stressed that any effort to avoid an escalation of tensions in the Middle East region must begin with an end to the brutal attacks of the Israeli occupation on Gaza, adding that the international community must count on an immediate ceasefire in the region. Mr. Benjama deplored again the Security Council's inability to act, given thus the Israeli forces the green light to attack Lebanon while continuing its crimes in Gaza. The Minister of the Interior, Local Authorities and Town Planning, Brahim Arad, has had talks with the Director General of the International Organization for Migration, IOM, Ami Pope, outside the meeting of Interior Ministers of the G7 held in Mirabella, El Clano in Italy. During the meeting, the two sides hailed the relations of cooperation existing between Algeria and IOM. In this connection, the organization's Director General hailed the efforts made by the Algerian authorities in support of the IOM's action aimed at mobilizing human and material means for the handling of the migrants' humanitarian situation and facilitating the migrants' return. Evoking the migration issue, the Interior Minister Brahim Arad had the following to say.
Dealing with illegal migration, which has multi-dimensional repercussions, is inconceivable with short-term measures, as it requires a global, integrated, coordinated and supportive vision aimed essentially at tackling the root causes of the phenomenon by providing the factors of security and stability and supporting development in the countries of origin. This is the perspective that Algeria defends, a perspective based on the relationship between security and development. Algeria, under the leadership of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmadjid Tebboune, is continuing its efforts to support development in the African countries, particularly in border areas, through structuring projects and cooperation and solidarity initiatives in the region, while advocating the cause of development in Africa in all international fora.
Let's recall that the Interior Minister had met with his Italian counterpart Matteo Piantedosi outside the G7 meeting of Interior Ministers. The meeting focused on how to reinforce cooperation between the two countries, notably between the police academies, through the exchange of expertise, training, and the prevention of major risks. Algeria has expressed through the voice of its permanent representative to the UN, Ammar Benjama, its deep concern regarding the act of deliberate sabotage of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines. Speaking during a briefing at the UN Security Council on threats to international peace and security, Mr. Benjama stressed that 2 years after this serious incident that threatened international peace and security, the perpetrators of this act have still not been identified nor brought to justice. He added that thanks to the investigations carried out by the competent authorities in Germany, Sweden, and Denmark, the Council has been informed that the damage suffered by the gas pipelines was due to an act of sabotage, deliberate sabotage. Let's listen to him.
I would like to reiterate Algeria's deep concern over the deliberate destruction of the gas pipeline Nord Stream 1 and 2. 2 years have passed since this grave incident that threatened international peace and security, and yet the perpetrators haven't been identified nor brought to justice. Thanks to investigation carried out by the competent authority of Germany, Sweden, and Denmark, the Council have been informed that the damage to the 2 pipelines was caused by deliberate sabotage. The investigation by German authorities is still ongoing and will hopefully shed new light on this deliberate sabotage.
In this regard, Mr. Benjama affirmed that the security of cross-border energy installations was vital and cannot be threatened under any circumstances, noting that their sabotage impacts energy supplies not only for millions of people but also for vital sectors such as health, agriculture, food production, and transport, among others. He also reaffirmed Algeria's full support for the ongoing investigations conducted by Germany and for any international effort in the future, particularly under the auspices of the United Nations, noting that it is important to prosecute the perpetrators of these acts.
The security of critical transnational energy infrastructures is vital for all of us. It cannot be threatened under any circumstances. Their physical destruction impact the energy supply not only to millions of persons, but also to critical sectors such as healthcare, agriculture, food production, transport, and beyond. Second, we reiterate our full support for the ongoing German investigations and to any international effort, particularly under the auspices of the United Nations, which could shed further light on those attacks.
To conclude, the Algerian ambassadors stressed that strengthening regional and international cooperation is essential to ensure the prevention, protection, mitigation, preparation, and timely investigation of attacks against vital energy infrastructure. The Speaker of the National People's Assembly, Ibrahim Boughali, has chaired a coordination meeting devoted to the examining of the latest preparations for the participation of a delegation from the lower house of parliament in the 4th annual meeting of the UN Standing Committee on Special Political Questions and Decolonization, slated for October 7 and 14 at the UN headquarters in New York. At the start of the meeting, Boughali welcomed the resolution adopted by the committee at its previous annual meetings, which reaffirms the right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination in line with the principles and resolutions of the United Nations, highlighting on the occasion the consistency of the position of the UN, its organs and its bodies concerning the question of Western Sahara as a question of decolonization. And the European Court of Justice has reaffirmed that Morocco has no sovereignty over Western Sahara and that the occupied territory cannot be included in any EU-Morocco trade or fisheries agreement. The president of the EU Court of Justice, Koen Lenaerts, indicated that the EU-Morocco trade and fisheries agreement that currently involve Western Sahara must cease within 1 year. The court considered that the European Commission had breached the right of people in Western Sahara to self-determination by concluding trade deals with Morocco. The court's decision marks the culmination of a series of legal battles challenging the inclusion of Western Sahara in agreements between the EU and Morocco. Western Sahara Resources Watch anticipates that the final documents of the ruling will be published soon. The EU Court of Justice ruling is considered a victory for the right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination and independence, as emphasized by the Sahrawi Foreign Minister Mohamed Sidati.
Il faut que la communauté internationale
The international community must make an effort to bring Morocco back to the path of international truth. So at this sensitive time, of course, perhaps the intention is elsewhere. I wouldn't say no, but the conflict is in Western Sahara is part of these conflicts, which also threaten peace, especially security and stability in the North African region and the Maghreb. It's very important at this moment and in this context to pay attention to what is happening in Palestine, in the Middle East. So I think we have just learned the lessons, and in the conflict in Western Sahara, we should make prevail the path of law and the logic of negotiation, dialogue and solution through peaceful means, and not to continue on this path of force that risks leading the world to the brink of abyss.
To the situation in the Middle East, where at least 23 Palestinians have been killed over the past 24 hours and more than 60 others wounded in new airstrikes carried out by the Israeli army against various parts of the Gaza Strip. The news agency Wafa said several people were killed or wounded in the Israeli raids that targeted the area of Beit Hanun in the northern part of the territory. This came as the Israeli army pursued its attacks on Lebanon, mainly on the southern suburb of the capital Beirut, amid ground fighting raging in the southern part of the country. The capital's southern suburb was heavily pounded by the Israeli aircraft, destroying several buildings. Lebanese sources affirmed that clashes continued as the Israeli soldiers once again attempted to move forward. Israel's escalation in Lebanon came in the wake of nearly 1 year of exchanges of fire that caused the displacement of thousands of people. The Lebanese government secured or assured that up to 1.2 million people were displaced by the fighting that killed more than 1,000 people for the past 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the Arab group within the United Nations reiterated in New York its full support for the role played by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and to its mission fulfilled in accordance with the UN Charter since Israel launched its attack on Gaza as well as on Syria and Lebanon. This came in response to the Israeli occupying authorities' decision to ban the UN chiefs from entering the occupied Palestinian territories, declaring him persona non grata. And in Tunisia now, the people will go to the polls tomorrow to elect a new president. The higher independent body for the election announced that the polls set up in the Arab, European and East Asian countries have opened to allow the Tunisian living abroad to cast their ballot. According to the electoral body, the election process is taking place in good organizational and logistical conditions. And now back to Algeria, where the Minister of Health Abdelhak Saihi has announced that the works and equipment of a 60-bed hospital in the province of Ain Ghazam will soon be finalized, allowing the inhabitants of the province to benefit from a vital health structure. During the inspection visit, which led him to the various structure or health structures of the province of Ain Ghazam, Mr. Saihi affirmed that the structure will be equipped with modern high-quality medical equipment and supervised by specialist doctors, specifying that the health facilities will be equipped with 4x4 ambulances adapted to the Saharan region. Meanwhile, the health minister affirmed that the number of cases of malaria and diphtheria has decreased in Tinzabatin, insisting on the need to vaccinate all the inhabitants of the region where cases have been reported or of neighboring regions as preventive measures likely to contribute to accelerating the eradication of these important or imported diseases. And finally, Algeria's Minister of Culture and the Arts, Soraya Moulouji, has highlighted the country's achievements in the film industry and other arts in Oran. In a speech made at the opening of the 12th edition of the Oran International Arab Film Festival, the minister said that over the last years, in addition to a number of major cultural projects, Algeria inaugurated the first film city in the south of the country and launched plans to build others in other regions, in addition to the launch of the National Center for Film Archives and their digitization, the first National Higher Institute of Cinema named after Mohamed Lakhdar Hamina, and the first art high school in Africa, which includes artistic specialties such as cinema and audio visuals. With this last piece of news, we come to the end of this news bulletin. Time now for our weekly program, starting with Echoes of Time by our colleague Mariam Bershi, will be followed by another program on economy by our colleague Saeed Bougazi. As for me, I'll meet you again tomorrow. Thank you.